Okay.
All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the public meeting for the 2023-2026 update for the Transportation Improvement Program for the SPC region. Tonight, we're going to be talking about things going on in Armstrong, Butler, and Indiana counties. We have representatives on our line with us, joining us from all three of the counties, as well as PennDOT District 10. So tonight I'm gonna walk us through the progress being made on the 2021-2024 TIP, talk about current investment levels, and also give a highlight on some recently completed projects in the three counties. I'm then going to turn it over to Ryan Gordon, the manager of program development, to talk about the 2023 and 2026 TIP development process. He's also going to talk about some other updates we have going on at SPC, and then he'll turn it back to me to talk about some developments being made at the federal level regarding transportation funding, as well as some things going on at the state level. And by the way, I forgot to introduce myself. My name's Andy Waple. I'm the Director of Transportation Planning for the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission. So just so everybody's aware, the Transportation Improvement Program is a 4-year program of projects outlining the highest priorities in the Southwestern Pennsylvania region that are going to be receiving funding over the next 4 years. The program's updated every 2 years, and we're right in the midst of developing the update that's going to slated to be adopted by SPC at the end of June of 2022. We always like to go out and visit with our counties and our members about midway through the process to give them an update on what you can expect in the draft plan, some projects that are advancing, and just to gather comments and feedback on the draft program and how things are progressing. Again, typically we like to go out and meet with all of our counties, but due to lingering effects of COVID, we're still forced to do online virtual meetings. Hopefully when we come back out in May for our 30-day public comment period, hopefully we're going to be able to get out and visit each one of the counties in the region like we normally do, because we really value it. It's really valuable to the process to get out and to talk with folks on their home turf and really learn what's going on in each corner of the county. Us being a relatively small staff covering 10 counties and over 548 municipalities, we really rely on these public meetings as well as our county planners that we have on with us tonight to really get the pulse of what's going on in the region. So again, hopefully we'll be able to get out and see everyone in May. Just want to highlight some current investments that are in the program, the current program, the 2021-2024 program. As you can see on the screen, these are the bridge and highway investments, totaling about $1.57 billion, with about a third of that going to bridges. A little over $300 million for roadways, $133 million for reconstruction and new capacity projects, $185 million for projects that improve operations like traffic signals and turn lanes and things like that. And then also $157 million for safety improvements. Also want to point out a substantial amount of money, $114 million, being dedicated to multimodal improvements, things such as bus replacements or improvements to transit facilities, as well as active transportation facilities that include sidewalks and bike lanes and things like that. On the public transportation side, about $2.23 billion overall, with the vast majority of that, as you can see outlined in red here, going to operations and maintenance. I would like to point out that about 96% or 97% of this does go to the Port Authority of Allegheny County, who is by far the largest transit provider in the SPC region. Just about that, 96 or 97% of the funding goes to them. They also account for about 96% of the transit trips in the region. So some other things being invested are new buses and passenger vehicles, equipment and facility upgrades, as well as we have a substantial amount, about $120 million for some new capacity into the transit system, and that represents the downtown Pittsburgh to Oakland Bus Rapid Transit Project, which was a discretionary grant from the Federal Transit Administration. I just want to highlight real quickly on some completed projects that have been completed during the current TIP update. As you can see, there's a number of improvements to US 422 in both Butler and Armstrong counties. Multiple improvements on SR 228. That's a long-standing series of projects that Butler County is focused on delivering, along with PennDOT District 10. Very important freight corridor in the region, along with 422. So, you know, that's a lot of the focus for these this area of the region is 422, 228, and also Route 28 in Armstrong County as well. Over in Indiana County, as you can see here, we had some improvements to the Hoodlebug Trail, as well as a number of improvements to US 119, which is a critical north-south corridor within the region. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ryan Gordon, who's going to talk about the process to develop the 2023 to 2026 TIP.
Thanks, Andy. In the next few slides, I'll be providing an overview of the 2023 TIP update. And right now, we're pretty much in the middle of numerous activities that are required to produce the pre-draft TIP. And we always like to come out around this time, like Andy said, and provide this input. We're a little more than halfway through this process. We like to provide this as kind of an update to the activities that are going on. So as you can see here, you know, this graphic is really a simplification of a complicated process. It's a generalized view of a process that takes over a year and a half to complete. This process begins and ends with public involvement, and the overarching key element of this process is that it is a collaboration and it's consensus. You know, it's consensus driven, and we do everything through a collaboration with our partners. So it's important to remember that there's over 90 professionals involved in this process, from over 20 different organizations working together with oversight from FHWA and FTA to produce the 4-year program. You'll see in the second box there TIP development work groups, and really the next 4 slides are all activities that take place in those TIP work groups. So in District 10, this includes SPC staff, it includes District 10 staff and District 10 officials, it includes Armstrong, Butler, and Indiana County staffs, as well as transit providers in those counties. And so really a thanks goes out to those folks that really make it happen in those work groups and the collaboration that we have. You can see that it starts with kind of identifying needs, identifying candidate projects, screening those candidate projects, and then developing the carryover TIP and a draft TIP. So we're right now really focused on the end of the calendar year here to provide our pre-draft TIP. Following that, we'll have our air quality conformity that we conduct along with our environmental justice analysis. And then we get to around about the May period, we'll have a 30-day public comment period in which we'll put the draft TIP out for comment. Next slide, please. So this is a more complicated version of the schedule, and I only put this up here to really prove the point that, you know, there's a lot of interrelated activities that are going on, and there's really 3 different parts to this diagram. the top panel is really the public involvement, and we really conduct that throughout. And like I said, at the beginning, and middle, and end of the processes, we have key public involvement points. You can see in the middle, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the middle there that I don't expect you to see, but that's all our different activities that are going on, all the different milestones that we have to achieve. And you can see it's very interrelated with the bottom there, which is our TIP development work groups. And so we've had, in the region so far, we've had 12 TIP work group meetings. We've had, I believe, 4 in District 10. We, for the region, we're looking to have about 3 or 4 more TIP work group meetings really close on this pre-draft TIP. And so you can see that there's just a lot going on right now, and we're shooting for the end of that diagram in that green box is the 2023 TIP adoption and consideration by the Commission in June of 2022. So next slide, please. So I mentioned this a couple of times, but our TIP process has really got multiple places along the way for public involvement, and the TIP process really starts with us engaging our committees and making notifications through our various sources of the 45-day STC comment period that comes before the TIP update. And from that comment period, we received over 600 comments on transportation in the SPC region. We also gather comments from other sources, such as our past public meetings or our past public comment periods that we may have had, for the example, the 2021 TIP. And we also have avenues through our website or our email that we can also collect comments. So we take all this comment, we look at these comments, and we discuss them at our second TIP work group meeting. And we really look at these and consider these comments, and we assign a status to them as to what's going to happen with each of those comments. So, we have a lot of them lead to, further studies or comments on projects. So it's just important that we continue to engage public this way. Next slide, please. So the funding trends are shown here on this chart, and you'll see from the 2015 TIP to the 2023 TIP, this is a chart of our base funds, broken down into highway, bridge, and transit. So on that blue panel, or those blue bars, you can see we have a concerning downward trend in our highway bridge funding. Just since the last TIP in 2021, that number's down 14%. This is mostly driven by the state's decision to decrease our regional funds in order to put more money forward towards the Interstate program. And you'll see that if you're comparing these year to year, you'll see just in the amount that we spend on our highest level network, which is the NHS, you'll see that we're down about 30% as a region for funding for that network. Overall, this puts us, as far as the regional TIP funding, we're now at pre-Act 89 levels when it comes to the amount that we have on our highway bridge TIP. So next slide, please. So just wanted to talk a little bit, of course, about the mix of funds. We have both federal and state funds on the TIP. And so it's a lot of projects are, obviously combining this funding. So just to recap here on some of the things that are going on, but, we had a short-term FAST Act extension. FAST Act was the authorization at the federal level for transportation funding, and that has been renewed and updated very recently in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was signed by the president on Monday. So we're going to be getting a lot of assistance in terms of an increase in federal funding, which, Andy's going to discuss more about, what we may be able to expect for Pennsylvania. We're not sure right now of the timing of, how long this is going to take to actually, reach into our program, but it's a good development nonetheless. And like I said, Andy will be touching on that a little later here in the presentation. The second bullet is I did talk about 14% decrease in our regional tip funds as the base. Now, part of that, of course, was the interstate that we set aside money for, but also, we're looking at just that state funding being down due to the COVID pandemic impact on the state's gas tax receipts. So if you're looking at the entire state, you'll see, that we have about $152 million less in the money being collected through that state gas tax. So consequently, our state funding for highway and state funding for bridge are both down. We're down about 10% in our state highway funding, and we're down about 20% in our state bridge funding. So you can see, as I noted, the state continues to prioritize the investments in interstate, and I'll cover that a little more in the next slide. And the last bullet there is really just something we wanted to mention, which is there's been some tweaks in the formula that allow us to really put more emphasis on increasing our preservation treatments. And preservation treatments are just projects that are keeping good roads good and good bridges good. And so we're not tied to that worst first strategy any longer. So we really wanted to, we're really starting to increase the usage of these preservation projects, and you'll see that. So, like I said, the interstate is really in need of a serious investment at the state level. And I don't think anyone would diminish the importance of investing in the interstate system. The interstates in Pennsylvania account for 26% of all traffic, but really around 57% of the state's interstate is over 40 years old. And so it really needs a lot of investment. And really, this situation's not unique to Pennsylvania. It's really a nationwide problem. There's a tremendous amount of funding needed to keep the interstates in good condition. And really, they're really in need of modernization and in some cases, a total reconstruction. So even more money is needed to get to that level of investment. And then the last thing we wanted to mention here was, with the performance measures that we have for our transportation program, it's really prioritizing the condition of that highest level network, which is the interstate and the national highway system. So we're going to continue to put investments into that highest level network. You're going to see eventually, there's going to be impacts to the lower tier networks in terms of the condition there. So this slide here is just a capture of our website. And SPC has really done a lot here to develop a comprehensive performance-based planning and programming approach and process through collaboration with USDOT and PennDOT, integrating these performance measures into how we build the TIP update and what we consider. So when the TIP document comes out in May, we'll have an entire chapter that's dedicated to reporting on the current status of these performance measures. These are things like safety, bridge condition, highway condition on the highest level networks. There's also, system reliability and congestion performance measures, and there's also transit measures in there too. So as I said, we'll have a detailed accounting of how the TIP will make progress towards achieving these targets. and a report on where we stand on these existing performance measures. So next slide, please. Yeah, so we wanted to make the point that even though we're down in funding, we'll continue to progress on projects, we'll continue to advance projects. It might not be what we'd all quite prefer. In fact, we're going to have some of our phases stretched out over more years than we'd like. But you can see some projects here in Armstrong and Butler County, and on the next slide in Indiana, you'll see a lot of these projects are going to continue to advance, but it's likely maybe in pre-construction phases. Funding for construction may slide a year or two, or perhaps off the tip. So keep these in mind. What we're looking at here, there's no new projects here. These are all projects that are already on the current program, on the current tip. So all we're trying to do here is continue to work on what we've already placed on the tip, and we're trying to advance those. So that's just a sample of a few projects. Here's a sample of a few projects in Indiana County, projects that are advancing. Again, there's no new projects here. There's nothing that's a big new project. We're just going to be trying to keep up with what we've already started, and trying to deliver on those projects. Next slide, please. So when we look at these funding shortfalls, like the ones I discussed earlier, there'll be impacts to projects. And if you're looking at how much funding it'll take to continue the projects we have in the current tip to complete them, this is what you're looking at and then we call that carryover, the amount of money it's going to take to complete the projects we've already started. And if you look at that, you'll see those numbers here in red, the deficits that we are experiencing in each of our districts. So if you compare the carryover projects to what we have available in our regional tip funds, those are those red numbers. And you can see that puts us in a pretty big hole for the region. And so we're going to have some of our bigger projects probably going to be significantly delayed. So we're going to be looking at this, and when we have the draft tip out, we're going to have we're going to have delays in projects. We're going to have projects out a little further than we'd like them, or possibly even off of the tip for the construction. So these are an example of a few projects that are in that situation in Armstrong, Butler, and Indiana counties. Next slide, please. So just under $2 billion of our draft tip on the transit side, is going towards advancing projects that are with our transit providers. And of course, this includes big projects, Port Authority of Allegheny County, and maintaining light rail vehicles and buses, and the Pittsburgh to Oakland downtown, BRT projects. But it also includes, projects for the transit providers out here in District 10. And here's a sample of a few of the projects in the 3 counties. And this is, the typical stuff we have on the transit tip side. It's replacing buses, bus purchases, maybe some facility upgrades here and there, and mainly operating assistance as well. So you can see those are the 3, transit providers in District 10, and you'll see, some of the projects that they have there that are going to be on our draft tip. So next slide, please. So a couple of updates on some specialty programs that we deal with here at SPC, and then some upcoming tasks associated with them. So we've got two discretionary programs that we're in the middle of running a competitive process for right now. One of them is the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program, or CMAQ. The other one is the Transportation Alternatives Program, or TA. On the CMAQ side, we have 16 candidate projects for a total of about $47 million. We are, constrained to probably around 35 million in available funding for those projects. And this is a detailed, a competitive and detailed technical process that we put these projects through. There's a lot of technical scoring in terms of their air quality benefits. And that process is underway right now. We expect to have selections announced for this program in December. On the TA side, it's very similar schedule. We have 12 candidate projects to around $7 million in requests. We're looking at an approximate range of 3 to maybe 3.5 million available. And this is also a technical process by which we evaluate these candidate projects on several criteria. And like I said, that's underway right now, and the selections will be coming in December. So next slide, please. This is just a slide to kind of remind everybody that the PennDOT Connects process is continuing. It's something that overall has been very beneficial to municipalities as well as PennDOT and SPC. The projects that end up on the tip go through this PennDOT Connects process. It's really early interactions with municipalities and information gathering where, the designers of the projects, can learn about the local conditions and the local context. And this allows PennDOT to really design these projects to better serve communities and better adjust to what's going on in the community. And here's a list of just a few things that are considered when we're doing this Connects process and these Connects outreach. And a lot of it is what's going on in the community, and is there times where the project needs to be aware of some significant events or things like that. And then there's also enhancements, what can be done in terms of bike ped or transit, and even some stormwater management. So those are the type of things that are discussed in the PennDOT Connects with the community, with the municipalities. And this is my last slide. This is just what's remaining to do here for the TIP development schedule. Like I said, right now we're in our program development. We're shooting for our pre-draft TIP to be completed by the end of the calendar year. We're in our public involvement, public meeting sessions like tonight are going on. I mentioned the project selections on SPC's discretionary funding. Then we'll be providing a briefing to our commission in early December on the pre-draft TIP and what's in there. And then we'll shift over to in the springtime, late winter, early spring. We get a PennDOT central office review, and then we start our air quality conformity and our environmental justice analysis and our document preparations. We get to May, that'll start our 30-day public comment period, some point in May there, and we'll be looking to have public meetings at that time. And then it's all, everything's geared towards looking at that June 2022 commission meeting where we'll consider and adopt the draft TIP. And then the draft TIP would take effect, in 2023 in October of 2022 at the start of the federal fiscal year. So that's it for me. I'm going to kick it over to Andy. He's got a little more detail on, the federal level and what's been passed by Congress and signed by the president and how that might impact us, and also a few other things going on at the state level. So turn it over to you, Andy. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. So yeah, as Ryan said, I just want to briefly touch on a couple things going on at the federal level, and then some measures being considered here at the state level to kind of bolster our state revenues for transportation. So as you are all probably aware of, it's been in the news a lot over the last couple weeks. And as Ryan mentioned, on Monday, the president signed into law the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is a 5-year act. It addresses a lot of different types of infrastructure, water and sewer and broadband, and airports and things like that. But for tonight's purposes, we're going to just talk about highways and bridges and public transportation. So the plan provides about $350 billion nationally over 5 years. That's $100 billion over and above what is being invested in now. So what was part of the last federal authorization for transportation. So it's a pretty significant increase. However, with that increase, as we pointed out earlier, and the condition of the interstates, not just in Pennsylvania, but across the country, it's still, not really enough to be able to address all of the problems on all of the roadways and bridges within Pennsylvania and the nation as a whole. So with that, we're expecting to receive about nationwide about 91 billion for transit and about 66 billion for passenger rail. I also want to touch on the nearly $65 billion in investments in broadband or high-speed internet, which we're also preparing a regional strategy for as well. There's a new bridge program among a number of different new and familiar discretionary programs that are going to be out. This new bridge program brings in an additional 27.5 billion nationwide, and we'll see on the next slide what that means for Pennsylvania, as well as investments to things like electric vehicle charging infrastructure and charging stations and things like that. One thing that the IIJA does not do, it does not provide a long-term sustainable revenue stream for transportation. So the Highway Trust Fund, which is where all the money for transportation improvements for highways and bridges and public transportation comes from at the federal level, is primarily paid for with the federal gas tax, which stands at 18.4 cents a gallon. That has not been raised since 1993. So if you think what you could buy in 1993 with 18.4 cents a gallon, and you think of what you can buy now with 18.4 cents, it's not a whole lot. Really, the buying power of that 18.4 cents now is right around 10 cents. So it does not, there's no new mechanisms to fund transportation being proposed in the IIJA, so it still relies heavily on the gas tax. So to plug that hole in the Highway Trust Fund, which is, with vehicles becoming more and more fuel efficient and people buying electric vehicles that use no gas at all and pay nothing into the system, there's a growing hole within the Highway Trust Fund. So to plug that hole, Congress has borrowed $118 billion, or will borrow $118 billion over the next 5 years from the general fund to put into the Highway Trust Fund to make it solvent. That'll go about $90 billion to highways and $28 billion to public transportation. The Congress had to do the exact same thing during the last highway authorization bill. That was about $70 billion from the general fund. So as you can see, as more investments get made and the proposal providing $100 million more, it's actually taking more than that $100 million from the general fund to be able to prop up the Highway Trust Fund. One thing I do want to highlight on that is, all these federal funds come with a match. They typically are 20%. So when you finance a project that's $1 million, it'll be $800,000 federal and $200,000 state or local. So if we want to really be able to leverage all of these new federal funds that are coming in, we're going to have to do something at the state level to be able to match those funds. So as you can see on the following slide here, we're going to be getting about $3.9 to $4 billion in new funds in Pennsylvania as a result of the IIJA. So what that means for state funds, that we're going to need to raise an additional $1 billion in state funds to be able to really maximize and leverage those federal funds. As you can see on the screen, we currently receive about 1.8 billion a year under the current program in highway and bridge funds, and about 425 million in federal transit funds. So this new revenue is sorely needed. So another $4 billion over the next 5 years for highways and bridges, which equates to about 466 million in formula. And I mentioned the bridge program that was 27.5 billion. We're looking at that bringing in about an extra $320 million a year on average to the state of Pennsylvania. And you can see a more modest increase to federal transit per year there. One thing to note is the state of Pennsylvania, through the gas tax that's paid at the wholesale level from Act 89, we really invest a lot of state funds in public transportation. So if it wasn't for the state funds that we invest in transit systems, they would not exist. Because you can't sustain, for example, in southwestern Pennsylvania, we have 10 transit agencies just in southwestern Pennsylvania, and there's many, many more across the Commonwealth. You're not going to be able to sustain those on $630 million a year, from the federal government. So the state government really props up the transit funding across the state. So a few things going on at the state level. I had mentioned, the need to be able to match these funds. When Act 89 was passed, which is the law that states how much money is going to be paid wholesale for petroleum products, which in turn is passed down to the consumers. When it was adopted back in 2013, there was a couple things that we thought it was going to be a long-term funding solution, but in reality, every year there's been diminishing returns on Act 89. For example, when it was written into law, the gas tax wasn't indexed to inflation. So as you all know, what's going on right now with inflation, and just over the past few months alone, and take that back to 2013, we're losing about $100 million a year in buying power because the state gas tax is not indexed to inflation. So that hurts us right out of the gate. Secondly, as a result of that, when it was written into law back in 2013, there was a provision in it that directed a substantial amount of funding to the Pennsylvania State Police on a yearly basis. We're not arguing, that the state police is very important and very needed across the Commonwealth, but is it really the proper way to pay for it out of the transportation fund? Right now, we're at about $600 million a year coming out of the motor license fund to fund the state police, and that's even down over what it was a couple of years ago. Back in 2016, there was a budget measure passed to bring down that number 4% a year till it hit $500 million, where it will plateau. So back, a few years ago, it was even more. It was almost $800 million a year coming from the motor license fund, going to fund the state police. And as of now, there's no, it's being discussed, but there's no bills in play in the state legislature to shift that burden off of the motor license fund into something else. So that's one of the things that's being looked at in these two reports that the one that you see on the screen and one that you'll see at the next slide. So the Transportation Revenue Options Commission was put together representing a wide cross-section of geographical areas and local and state governments and transportation modes and the energy sector and the environmental sector, and a lot of folks brought together by the governor to look at possible revenue options to kind of shore up the funding for transportation at the state level. Again, the gas tax is not sustainable with vehicles becoming more and more fuel efficient every year. And there being mandates at the federal level for all vehicles to be off of petroleum by the 2030s. Something's got to happen, and it's not really a sustainable revenue stream. So Pennsylvania is really looking at all the options, everything from tolling, which we'll talk about here in a few slides, to redirecting the Pennsylvania State Police funds to different types of fees and taxes on vehicle registrations and electric vehicles, which I mentioned earlier, that pay nothing into the system right now, to transportation network companies, which are companies such as like Uber and Lyft, maybe putting taxes or fees on each of the rides that they produce, and even taxes on home deliveries. Again, you see with the pandemic over the last 18 months, 2 years, deliveries from Amazon and everything like that have really ramped up. A lot of people shopping online and not going into stores. So that's one of the options being looked at by this commission. Excuse me. And it's really, they're looking at a three-phased approach: a short-term, medium-term, and long-term measures to kind of solve the gas tax issue. The second study I wanted to highlight, and by the way, these are both available on the State Transportation Commission website. If you just kind of Google Pennsylvania State Transportation Commission and poke around on that website a little bit, you'll see these reports both in their entirety available for download on the website. So this study, it's called a Planning and Environmental Linkage Study into Alternative Funding. It digs a little bit deeper into the Revenue Options Commission study and looks at numbers and looks at, really starts to analyze the different types of funding mechanisms that are out there and possible, and what kind of revenues they might realize. And again, it's categorized into a short, medium, and long-term solution. So the short-term solutions include things like bridge tolling, which has been in the news a lot lately, and we'll talk about on the next slide. There's just been a measure passed by the House to repeal the PennDOT public-private partnership deal that authorizes their tolling of these bridges across the state. We'll talk about that in a second, as well as things like managed lanes. If any of you have driven around Washington, D.C., or outside of like Charlotte, North Carolina, or in Texas or in Florida, there's a lot of managed lanes. So around DC, I-66, the Capital Beltway, I-495, I-95, all have these lanes that are kind of cordoned off from the main travel lanes that charge a toll depending on what time of day you're traveling on them and how heavy or light the congestion is. So typically, if you have 2 to 3 people in the car, depending on what the policy is, you pay no toll. It's like an HOV lane, high occupancy vehicle lane. But if you're alone or only have 1 or 2 people in the car, you pay a variable toll rate depending on the congestion level. So if you're trying to drive in that lane in rush hour coming, into Washington, D.C., you may pay upwards of $1 or $2 a mile to travel in that lane and not sit in the immense traffic jams that are characteristic of that area. As opposed to if you travel the lane in the middle of the day, it might only cost you a couple cents. So those are the kind of things that are being looked at for the Commonwealth here and in certain places around the state where they're experiencing high levels of congestion, such as Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Harrisburg. The median term, one of the median term solutions is congestion pricing. So again, same idea, but pertains to all of the lanes, not just a set of managed lanes. It would be all of the lanes on any particular interstate, time of day, variable toll rate. And then long term is things like corridor tolling, like you see on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. You'll probably recall there was an effort a few years ago to toll I-80. So things like that, are which being considered for the long term. And then finally, phasing out the gas tax completely and looking at things like mileage-based user fees, which is, a toll being piloted at a number of states, including Pennsylvania, around the country, to look at ways to be able to do away with the gas tax, which again is not sustainable, but billing folks by how much they use the system and how much they drive. So, it may be as simple as every time you go to the gas pump, you punch in your mileage and it calculates a rate that you have to pay depending on how much you drive. Or it could be a thing that, plugs into your port under your dash and you receive a bill every month or every quarter or biannually or whatever it is. But those are things being looked at right now. The mileage-based user fee program, from what we understand, is the technology is not quite there yet to roll that out on a nationwide or even a statewide basis. It may take another 5, 8, 10 years from now to shore up the technology to be able to implement something like that on a wide scale. So those are just some examples of some of the measures the states are considering. Right now, there's really nothing outside of the bridge tolling written in the legislature or being considered in bills, but I suspect that once this federal money starts to hit, things are going to ramp up a little bit, and not to mention the provisions of Act 89 that sunset at the end of this fiscal year in June that deeply affect public transportation. So a big payment from the Turnpike to PennDOT to help public transportation set to go away here at the end of June. So in the winter session in the legislature, I have a feeling things are going to be very, very busy, and a lot of talk is going to be going on transportation. So I mentioned the major interstate bridge public-private partnership initiative, which is one of the short-term measures that came out of the reports. In the SPC region, we have one project, that is Project I on I79 in Bridgeville. PennDOT District 10, the counties outside of the SPC region, have 2 projects going on this potential list on I-80, letters G and H, both major bridges on I-80. And again, in the news just this week, the House has voted to overturn the authorization to do this. It still has to get through the Senate, and it still has to be signed by the governor. So we'll see where that goes. But as for this initiative, it's still moving forward at the state level with these 9 candidate projects from around the region. Just want to touch real briefly. This is kind of the last slide here. Touch real briefly on the I79 project that's in our region. Again, in the newspaper just this week, you probably saw that 3 of the municipalities in this area are suing PennDOT, based on perceptions of increased traffic and increased pollution and unfair burden to the residents and the communities around this project with the toll. They're really concerned. If you're familiar with this area in Bridgeville and South Fayette Township and Collier Township, there's a lot of congestion on the local roads here, and a lot of development taking place, and they're really concerned that people will be getting off of I-79 at interchanges north or south of this project and where the toll would be, and using local roadways to kind of divert their trip to avoid the toll. So there's a lot of discussions going on with the local PennDOT office here in these municipalities and residents in those areas to kind of learn their concerns and try to remedy the diversion that they think is going to take place as a result of these tools if they come to fruition. As you can see here, there's a number of components to this project. It's an interchange improvement at Bridgeville, an addition of a 3rd lane that fixes a bottleneck right in this area, where it tapers down to 2 lanes from 3 and then goes to 2 lanes to 3 just north of this area, and then also replacing the bridges over the creek and the railroad. So, PennDOT has indicated they're gonna deliver this project, whether it is funded with tolls or not. As you can see here, the cost is about $150 million. If it's not funded by tolls, it's just going to take that much longer, 10, 15 years to be able to come to fruition based on the backlog of projects we have, even with the increased federal funding and state funding that we're going to realize here, hopefully within the next few months. We're not quite sure when it's going to hit us, You know, when things are signed into law, they take time to write rules and regulations on how to use the money and how to spend the money. So it could be 3, 4, 5 months before this money even hits our program, to which we're going to have to go back and revise our program to bring in this money. But again, you know, it's a well-needed influx of cash, but it's not going to solve all of our problems. You know, we're going to be bringing back projects that are going to be have since been delayed, and we always try to put a few new projects on each new program in the last few years, so we can have a pipeline of projects always ready for construction funding in subsequent years. So hopefully we'll be able to, you know, bring back the immense amount of needs that we have already and get them back on schedule. And then also, you know, to be able to start design on a handful of new projects that can keep the pipeline flowing and keep our bridges and highways in safe and operable condition. So that's all we had tonight for the formal presentation. And before I ask Jared about any potential comments or questions in the Facebook Live chat, I want to turn it over to any of our partners at PennDOT or any of our counties if they have anything they would like to add or any points they would like to make.
Andy, it's Harold from PennDOT here in District 10. I'll just share with the group just basically what you said and Ryan said, that it's been a very challenging year for us to try to work through our project list. In any other year, we've tried to advance the projects that we had currently further out on the tip and move them forward, and then try to bring some projects maybe or further out on the 12-year plan onto the tip so that we could try to make them happen. This year's been very challenging. We have, as you mentioned, unrealistic cash flows in every one of our counties. We have a number of projects that maybe will be designed or built in 1 or 2 years, but they're going to be funded or paid for over 3 and 4 or maybe 5 years. So that is certainly not realistic as to what's going on in the program. It makes it very challenging for us to try to keep up with our funding capability as we only get a certain amount per federal fiscal year. So just to highlight how challenging it's been, we certainly appreciate all the partners we have in the region that's trying to provide our projects, bridge and roadway to the region here. So I'll just share that at this point.
Thanks, Harold.
Hi, Andy. It's Byron Stauffer.
Hi, Byron.
For those listening, Executive Director with the Indiana County Office of Planning Development. I believe Josh Krug, Deputy Director, sits on the SPC TTC meeting, was also on the call, but appreciate all the hard work that SPC staff, along with our PennDOT partners, you know, and providing an opportunity for my colleagues in, you know, Butler and Armstrong counties to collaborate, you know, to try to deliver. As Harold was mentioning, these are challenging times, and we certainly acknowledge that. But for those that are listening, you know, just want to ensure that, you know, we are working together. There are a lot of collaborations going on and discussions. SPC and PennDOT in particular are working hard to make sure that, you know, every dollar of opportunity that we can bring to the region is being sought after. And from an Indiana County perspective, you know, we're certainly, you know, and I've had conversations with Darren over in Armstrong about 422 as being a priority for Indiana County as it relates to economic development. Certainly, I'd be hesitant if I didn't mention, as we have over the years, you know, our continual collaboration with our municipalities as they struggle to deliver on local roadways and local bridges, and the challenges that they're facing relative to, you know, decreased funding in liquid fuels, and you know, certainly the collaboration for either CFA or PennDOT multimodal funds, and trying to be aggressive there. And lastly, I'll just mention, you know, certainly from a county perspective, you know, we're looking forward to collaborating, you know, with the team as the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the guidance from that is disseminated, and how we can potentially look at projects, and not that that's the holy grail, but certainly an opportunity to maybe do some things that maybe we didn't think were possible at the beginning part of the TIP process. So there's a lot of effort going into it, and I want to thank everybody that collaborates between SPC, PennDOT, and our fellow county planning departments to move these TIP process forward. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree, Byron, 100%. Thanks for those comments. All right, anybody else? Okay, hearing none. Jared, do we have any questions in the chat?
No questions at this time.
Okay, great. All right, everybody. Well, that concludes the meeting for this evening. This meeting has been recorded and will be posted on SPC's YouTube page. So if there's any friends or family or colleagues that didn't get to tune in tonight, please direct them to the SPC YouTube page. And as always, we have a public comment form on our website, and we're always looking for input into the program. We want to know where there's issues out there and ideas and everything like that. So please, we encourage everyone to if you have ideas, please submit them through the comment on the SPC website, and we greatly appreciate it. And thanks everybody for tuning in.